The movement of the player on the court while holding a ball is covered in the rules in Article 25, traveling, and it is always an area of concern. Point of emphasis. If a player starts a dribble while moving, the pivot foot may not be lifted before the ball is released from the hands. During recent years, the FIBA World Technical Commission has directed special attention to the officials on illegal movements when a player starts a dribble. In this area of officiating, good improvement has been achieved. Let's replay the sequence. White 5, while moving, receives a pass, catching the ball with his left rear foot touching the floor. This foot becomes the pivot foot. Continuing to move, he starts the dribble, lifting his pivot foot before releasing the ball from his hands, gaining an unfair advantage and easily passing his defender. Traveling violation. White 5 releases the ball only when his pivot foot again touches the floor. Official is correct in calling a violation. Blue 12 receives the ball and begins a fast break. He takes the ball in hand at the moment when his left foot, now pivot foot, is touching the floor. Continuing to run while in possession of the ball, he lifts the pivot foot before he releases the ball for the dribble, committing a traveling violation. Correct call for a traveling violation. Let's review the play. Team in red gathers the rebound and prepares to fast break. A ball is passed to red 9, who catches it in his hands when his left foot is in contact with the floor. Red 9 then lifts his left foot, the pivot foot, while still having the ball in his hand, thus creating a speed advantage over his opponent. Violation. He then also lifts his right foot and only releases the ball to start the dribble when the left pivot foot touches the floor again. However, sometimes miscalls happen in this play. Traveling violation that has been missed resulted in a foul called on the defensive player. Traveling violation missed by the officials. Pivoting is a legal movement of the player. Officials must be attentive to observe that the pivoting player keeps the pivot foot at its point of contact with the floor. White 14 beats her guard red 13 and dribbles to the restricted area. Meeting two other opponents, she stops on both feet and then establishes her left foot as the pivot foot. Trying to find an opportunity for the shot, White 14 makes several pivots, always keeping her pivot foot at its point of contact with the floor. She then lifts the pivot foot and releases the ball in a jump shot. Legal play. Now, with the benefit of replay, let's further analyze the situation. Blue 6 in a low post position receives the ball with 2 feet on the floor and then establishes his left foot as his pivot foot. He makes an initial pivot, keeping the pivot foot in its first place of contact. But then on the second pivot, he shifts his pivot foot before shooting. The official calls a traveling violation and cancels the basket. On replay, we see that Blue 6 slides his pivot foot from its initial position and changes its point of contact with the floor. Correct decision by the official to call traveling violation. The team in white takes the rebound, and White 8 outlets to her guard 5 with a long pass for the fast break. White 5 catches the ball under the opponent's basket with both feet on the floor. Moving the right foot, she establishes the left foot as her pivot foot. Initially, her pivots are legal in an attempt to get a position to shoot. But then White 5 lifts the pivot foot and puts it down again to the floor while still having the ball in her hands. She has changed the point of contact of the pivot foot with the floor. Good call for traveling violation from the lead official. Point of emphasis. To shoot for a field goal, the pivot foot may be lifted, but may not be returned to the floor before the ball is released from the hands. Let's have a closer look. Black 15 receives a pass and, after one dribble, takes the ball in hand, and it is the right foot that is established as the pivot foot. The offensive player pivots, making a wide step on the left foot, then lifts his right pivot foot and releases the ball for a shot before the pivot foot returns to the floor. Legal play. Let's take it step by step. Green 7, completing a dribble, takes the ball in hand, standing with her back to the opponent's basket with both feet on the floor. Lifting her right foot, she establishes her left foot as a pivot foot. Making a pivot, she then lifts her pivot foot and releases the ball before the pivot foot comes back to the floor. Legal play. Basket counts. Point of emphasis. If a player who has established a pivot foot moves the other foot and jumps, neither foot may be returned to the floor before the ball is released from the hands. White 4, after one dribble, catches the ball in his hands with both feet on the floor. Either foot can now be the pivot foot. White 4 slightly moves the right foot, and in doing so, establishes the left foot as his pivot foot. White 4 then jumps, lifting both feet off the floor, and then returns them to the floor again, still holding the ball. Violation is correctly called by the nearest official. Point of emphasis. If a player, while moving, jumps off a pivot foot and lands on both feet, neither foot may be lifted and returned back to the floor before the ball is released from the hands for a pass or shot. Let's review the situation. Blue 4 penetrates to the basket. Finishing the dribble, he catches the ball in his hands with his left foot touching the floor. Jumping off this pivot foot, he lands on both feet simultaneously, and jumping again, releases the ball for a shot before either foot returns to the floor again. Legal play. Now, with the benefit of replay, let's further analyze the situation. Red 6 receives the ball with the right foot on the floor, which is now considered as the pivot foot. He jumps into the restricted area and lands on both feet simultaneously. Neither foot is now allowed as a pivot foot. Therefore, neither foot may be lifted and returned to the floor before the ball is released. But Red 6 lifts his right foot off the floor and returns it back before jumping and while still in possession of the ball. Traveling violation is missed by the officials. Let's replay the sequence. The ball is passed into the restricted area to black 11. After one dribble, he catches the ball in his hands when his right foot is in contact with the floor. Right foot now is his pivot foot. Black 11 jumps off the pivot foot and lands on both feet simultaneously. Now neither foot may be lifted and returned back to the floor before the ball is released from the hands. But Black 11 lifts his left foot and returns it to the floor while still in possession of the ball, committing a violation. Correct call by the trail official. Today in basketball, one of the serious problems in officiating is the inconsistency in calling violations or making wrong calls when a player, while moving, receives a pass or completes a dribble and continues to move. Let's review the situation. White 12, using a screen, penetrates into the restricted area and catches the ball in his hands. When the right foot, now the pivot foot, is touching the floor. White 12 jumps onto the left and then onto the right pivot foot again before releasing the ball from his hands. Correct call for a traveling violation. Red 9 receives the ball at the three-point line, dribbles once, then catches the ball in her hands the moment when her left foot, now pivot foot, is on the floor. Making a wide step, she lifts a pivot foot and then releases the ball from her hands, clearly before the pivot foot returns to the floor. Legal play. Wrong call by the official for traveling violation. Let's take it step by step. On a fast break, White 10 completes his dribble with a layup. He picks up the ball and his right foot, now pivot foot, is on the floor. White 10 jumps on the left foot and then returns the pivot foot on the floor again before releasing the ball. Traveling violation. Correct call by the nearest official. Point of emphasis. One more technical element needs the attention of officials. When a dribbler meeting an opponent in front of him tries to pass the defensive player by turning, spinning, and reversing around them, the same principles of movement of feet must apply. The offensive player, blue 15, makes a spin to try to pass the defensive player. He catches the ball in his hands after completing the dribble and at the moment when his left foot, now pivot foot, is touching the floor. Continuing to spin, he lifts his pivot foot, steps onto the right foot, and passes the ball to his teammate, releasing the ball from his hands before the pivot foot again returns to the floor. Legal play.